Welcome to the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, powered by Jetro. Each week, we bring extremely valuable accounting and tax tips specific to small business owners. You will be on your way to growing your business and putting more money in your pockets. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is, what if I cannot afford to pay my taxes when due? Now, before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by Jetro and the Tax Minimization Program, which is a do-it-yourself training program to ensure that you pay the least amount in taxes as legally possible. I am your host and founder of Jetro, Mike Jesowshek. Again, today's topic is, what if I cannot afford to pay my taxes when due? And the first thing we want to talk about when we think about this is, if you cannot afford to pay your tax bill, do not panic. There are both options available, but there's also some things you want to make sure that you're doing correctly to avoid any kind of interest and penalties as much as possible. So what we're going to go through now is just a few things and a few important items we want to make sure that you are thinking about when you're stuck in a situation where you can't afford your tax bill. So the first thing, ensure that you still file your tax return or request an extension by the deadline. The single worst thing you can do is not file a tax return altogether, and this is just going to make the penalties and interest that much worse. If you do not file your tax return, you're going to have a failure to file and a failure to pay penalty along with interest that's going to add up. So first things first, ensure that you file your tax return. A tax return with no payment with it is better than no tax return and no payment as well. Second, pay as much as you can with the tax return or extension filing to avoid penalties and interest as much as possible. And again, last week we talked about an extension. An extension is not an extension of time to pay. It's simply an extension of time to file. So when you go to file your tax return or file that extension, that is when the taxes are due. And so if you want to learn more about extensions, how those work, what are some of the due dates of those, check out our podcast episode last week. Third, understand that you are not alone. This is a common situation, especially with small business owners. People get stuck in situations like this, and it usually happens at least one time. Because once it happens one time, they typically find a way to avoid it from happening in future times. Again, do not just avoid the situation. It can be stressful. This can be a tough time, but do not allow yourself to simply ignore the situation. Make sure that you're filing that tax return. The key thing about that is that if you file a tax return, you now know how much your tax bill is. If you avoid the situation, don't file a tax return, you never know what that tax bill is. And that can just make the stress, the anxiety around it even worse. If you extend your return, be sure to file your return by the final deadline, regardless of your ability to pay. Failure to file penalties can be brutal if we attach that onto failure to pay as well. So, what happens if you don't pay your taxes on time? Let's talk about penalties and interest. First, a failure to pay penalty. The failure to pay penalty is 0.5% per month of the tax owed after the due date. So 0.5% per month, and that has a maximum of 25%. If the IRS issues a notice of intent to levy or seize property, that rate will increase to 1% per month. So instead of 0.5% per month, it's 1% per month. Let's talk about interest. There's going to be interest on any unpaid amounts by the due date, and it's going to be based on the federal short-term rate plus 3% compounded daily. So the federal short-term rate plus 3% compounded daily, that's going to be the interest amount on any unpaid taxes. And note that that interest amount is also going to be on any penalties. So you miss your payment that first month, you get hit with a penalty, you're going to get hit with interest, and then you're going to get hit with interest on that penalty amount. So we now know kind of some key things to think about. We know what happens if we don't pay our taxes on time, failure to pay penalty, and interest gets assessed. What options are available to pay my taxes? First, one option you have is to borrow the funds. Consider borrowing the funds needed to pay your taxes, because oftentimes you can get a better rate on borrowing than what the IRS will charge you in interest. But just be careful with this. Make sure that you're making a good decision based on the interest rate comparison. We don't want to put a tax bill on a credit card bill that's going to get 20% interest. That doesn't make sense. So make sure that you're looking at the rates, you're looking at the options available to make sure that you're making a good decision if you decide to borrow the funds. You can do a short-term payment plan or an installment agreement. And basically, these are just agreements with the IRS to pay your taxes over a period of time. And you can apply for an installment agreement using Form 9465, or you can actually go directly online and apply for an installment agreement. And we're going to have a link in the show notes to an article we did on this as well. There's a link to that online application on there. If you get approved for a payment plan, ensure that you stick to the payments that you agreed upon. Because if you miss those payments, it can really screw up that installment agreement. So if you get approved for a payment plan and installment agreement, make sure you're sticking to the payments that you agreed upon. You can file an offer in compromise. And basically, this is an agreement between the taxpayer and the IRS that resolves or lowers a taxpayer's tax liability based upon an agreed upon amount. Now, offering compromises are relatively difficult and lengthy to go through. So you want to make sure that you're in a place of financial hurt if you're in a situation like this. Let's say you just made $1 million last year and you're stuck with a big tax bill and you're planning to make another $1 million this year. The IRS is not going to go in and offer and compromise with you. They know that you have assets, you have additional income, you have means to pay this. Offering compromise is going to be a lengthy process, and it's nothing that's for sure. And basically, the IRS is going to dig deep into everything. Your income, your assets, everything that you have, everything that you're making, and determine what you can afford for a tax payment or a payment plan. And that's basically what an offering compromise is. So you come to the table, you might have a tax bill of $100,000. They find you look, you're just not making any money. You have no assets to sell. You just have nothing at this point. They're going to look at that and say, let's lower your tax bill to a place that's more reasonable. So again, the offering compromise is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more lengthy of a process. Likely you're going to want to hire a professional on this. That's going to cost some money. So it's a possible option and route, and definitely a great route for many people. But just know it's not just a silver bullet to just lower your tax bill no matter what. The IRS also has a pre-qualifier tool to see if it would even be worth your time exploring this on their website, and that's also going to be in the article that we put in the show notes. And so when we talk about big tax bills, I also want to think about, what do we talk about on this podcast? We talk about tax savings. We talk about making sure that you're paying the least amount in taxes as legally possible. And so I just want to touch on that slightly, is that if we're stuck with a tax bill, an unexpected tax bill at the end of the year, that means a couple of different things. One, we didn't plan. We didn't do estimated quarterly taxes. We didn't do calculations to see what our potential tax bill was. If this is a big surprise for us, we didn't do any planning in that piece. That's a key thing that we want to think about. How can we change this moving forward? Let's start planning. Let's start looking at things that way. If we have stuck with a big tax bill, that means that we maybe didn't do any tax planning. We didn't do any tax strategies to lower our tax bill. We just kind of went through the year and weren't worrying about lowering that tax bill. Well, guess what? Now is a great time to think about, what strategies can I implement here this year to make sure that I'm paying less taxes when I file my tax bill next year. So just some things to think about. We're always talking about being proactive with your taxes, doing tax planning, looking at tax strategies. What can you implement to make sure that you're paying the least amount of taxes legally possible? But then as part of that as well, doing estimated tax calculations, finding out how much, based on your business performance, where you're at, how much your tax bill is going to be, making payments throughout the year to cover that, so that by the end of the year, there is no surprises. There is no big tax bill, because you already know what that bill is going to be. You maybe have made payments against it, or you may have not, but at least you know what that tax bill is going to be. So again, just want to go through a few things again. Make sure you're filing your tax return on time. That's the key thing. Do not just say, I owe a big tax bill, I'm not going to file a tax return, I'm just going to ignore it. That is the worst possible thing you can do. Making sure that you're filing your tax return on time is important. Even if there's no payment involved with it, that's okay. It's better than not filing. Pay as much as you can with your tax return or extension. That's going to help you avoid penalties and interest. And just remember, what we talked about last week's episode, an extension is not an extension of time to pay. It's simply an extension of time to file your tax return. Again, you're not alone. This is something that's common. Everybody kind of goes through that 1 year where they get stuck with a big tax bill and then they make changes to move when they're moving forward. Think about those changes. Use this as a time to learn and says, dang it, I got a big tax bill, but here's what I'm going to do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future instead of it just snowballing. If you don't pay your taxes on time, there's going to be a failure to pay penalty. That's 0.5% per month with a maximum of 25% of the tax owed after the due date. And you're going to have interest, which is the federal short-term rate, plus 3% compounded daily. So when we look at options to pay your taxes, you could borrow the funds from somebody. Be strategic about this. If you can get funds at a lower rate than what the IRS is going to charge you, why not borrow some funds from somebody to pay that bill, and then you can pay that person back. But again, just be careful with this. Make sure we're not putting a tax bill on a credit card that's going to earn 20% interest when we could just get 3% interest with the IRS, 3% plus. You can do a short-term payment plan or an installment agreement. And basically, this is just an agreement with the IRS to pay your taxes over time. Most times, you're still collecting interest during this time, but at least you're on a payment plan that the IRS is okay with, they're fine with, and everybody's happy in that situation. You can also look at an offer in compromise. This is basically an agreement with the IRS and taxpayer to lower a potential tax liability. Again, this may sound easy, but it is a lengthy process. They really do dig into your information. So this is going to be something you're probably going to want to hire a professional to help you with, but there is a pre-qualifier tool on the IRS website to see if it would even be worth your time. So if you're faced with a big tax bill, feel free to reach out to our team and discuss options and see which may be the best route for you. We may be able to help you out with an offer in compromise if that's even a route for you. So just let us know if you're stuck in that situation. And again, let's think about, instead of being stuck in this situation, what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen in the future? And so that's where we're going to talk about our tax minimization program. This is a program we launched this year, which is a do-it-yourself tax training, tax strategies. Basically, we have a library of tax strategies and implementation guides that you can start using today and implementing these tax strategies in your business. You also have unlimited access to ask us general tax questions. So as questions come in that are general tax questions, you can reach out to us. You have unlimited access to our team. We have a private Facebook group. We have monthly group training sessions and so much more. So if you're looking to save taxes, our tax minimization program may be great for you. You can go to www.taxsavingspodcast.com/tax. I'll also have a link in the show notes, but it's taxsavingspodcast.com/tax. And finally, don't forget to check out our Facebook group. Just go into Facebook, search in Small Business Tax Secrets, answer a few questions, and jump in there. There's a bunch of business owners just like you talking in there, asking tax questions. A lot of the episodes that we talk about, a lot of the conversations that we bring on the podcast come from questions that clients have in our Facebook group. It's a free Facebook group. So go to Facebook, search in Small Business Tax Secrets. There'll be a couple questions you need to answer to get in, and then you can start collaborating with other business owners. So again, I know this is a subject that is a little bit tough. I don't like talking about having clients with big tax bills due, but at the same time, it happens. It happens every day, especially during tax season. We're seeing it. And so we wanted to talk about some of the options available and what you can go route that you can go on. And again, let's think about if we're stuck with a big tax bill, what can we do to avoid that in the future? So I want to thank you again for listening to another episode, and I will see you next week.
This has been another episode of the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast from the team at Jetro. If you enjoy our weekly episodes, please leave a review on whatever platform you listen to us on and share with other business owners. If you have any questions or future topics you want to hear, email them to tax@jetrotax.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.